I will start. So my title has changed slightly from the one that I gave Alex, but basically the same. But there will be some talk of spiders not on and off webs, and three stories. And I'm visiting you from the Lyman Entomological Museum at McGill in Montreal, but I'm actually not physically there right now. I am joining you from St. John's, Newfoundland today. So here we go. And I'll start by acknowledging all the people who I don't want to forget to acknowledge at the end. So my lab mates and supervisor in the Andrade lab from my PhD, my current lab members at the Lyman. Sean McCann is responsible for the vast majority of the beautiful photographs you'll see in this talk. This group of people in the center of the slide were students in the animal behavior class that Sean and I taught at U of T a few years ago, and they helped to design and carry out the experiment that we like to call the X-race that will come up later in the talk. And of course, thank you to all of my funders, and especially to the Sayut First Nation, who allowed us to do work on their lands. So I'd like to tell you three stories today about my research, and those are the three sort of subtitles of the talk. But I'd also like to talk about three aspects of my identity as a researcher, and how these have influenced my approach to science, and enabled me to ask really interesting questions and improve the way I communicate my results and engage with society more broadly. So each of these stories is about spiders and their webs in one way or another. And as I go through, hopefully it'll become clear how they're also linked by these threads of natural history and science communication, and of course, arachnology, to sort of make this whole picture. So to start with, I'm a behavioral ecologist, but I'm really an arachnologist. And I identify as an arachnologist because even though I have done research on a variety of organisms, including birds and insects, lots of non-arachnids, I really am a taxon-focused researcher with a particular passion for spiders and their relatives. And if you ask Google, what is an arachnologist, it certainly identifies me as, my picture will come up. So I think that means that I am an arachnologist. I started out being primarily interested in behavior, but I'm really flexible about the kinds of questions that I ask about spiders, which I think has been a real advantage in terms of research opportunities and discoveries throughout my career. So why do I love spiders so much? What's so great about them? I will tell you first in the words of Rob Bennett, who's that other guy who shows up when you Google an arachnologist and one of my important mentors. So he says that spiders are ruthless storm troops in the matriarchal anarchy that is the arthropod world. Theirs is the most diverse, female-dominated, entirely predatory order on the face of the earth. And as such, spiders are key components of every ecosystem in which they live. So spiders, as Rob said, they live in almost every terrestrial ecosystem on the planet, with the exception of Antarctica, from beaches to deserts, to mountaintops, to the Arctic tundra, to tropical rainforests, temperate rainforests, you name it, spiders are there, even in your house beside you right now. There are over 50,000 species of spiders worldwide, and they have an incredible diversity of habitats, morphologies, life histories, and behavioral adaptations that lead to a vast array of interesting ecological and evolutionary questions. And personally, I study spiders because they're beautiful, as you can see in these photographs. They're beautiful animals with sophisticated communication systems, fascinating, diverse behaviors and ecologies, and because they constantly challenge my human biases and my preconceptions about the natural world. So the first story that I want to share with you is about Black widows and work that I did on my PhD. So to set the mood for this story, I'd like you to start by imagining for a moment that you are a female Black widow, like the one in this photograph. So you're a female Black widow, you're a loner, and frankly, pretty lazy. You're never leaving home, this tangled, messy web under a driftwood log. You spend all your time there eating whatever beetles, ants, or other unlucky arthropods blunder into your web. Once you're ready to reproduce, you're going to signal your receptivity by applying a sex pheromone that looks something like this to your silk and waiting for males to answer this web-based personal ad and arrive at your doorstep. Now, imagine for a moment that you're this male Black widow and you're ready to find a mate. To get into his 8 very tiny shoes, imagine that you're only about 1 centimeter tall and the nearest receptive female might be more than 50 meters away from the web that you grew up at. And if you scale back up to human size, that would be like trying to detect another person 7.5 kilometers away from you. Finding a female, if you're a male Black widow, entails a very long walk along a beach, but you don't get to enjoy it because you are essentially blind. You only go out at night and the beach is crawling with predators. And even without the risk of being eaten, it's not going to be a leisurely stroll, but a race to be the first male to arrive at the web of a rare receptive female. So once you detect her based on that silk-bound pheromone, it's really important that you be the first male to arrive at her web, because once a male Black widow steps onto a female's web, he can start destroying it, unraveling it, and bundling it up into a little ball, covering that with his own silk and essentially shutting down her pheromonal advertisement so that other males won't be able to find her. So the question I wanted to answer is, how do male Black widows win this race to find females? Before we try to answer this, let's back up and talk about why this is an interesting question, even if for some reason you aren't particularly interested in Black widow spiders. So when we think about precopulatory sexual selection, the mechanisms that probably come to mind are exaggerated weapons that are used in contests over mating opportunities, and extravagant ornaments and displays that are used in mate choice. But for many animals and most terrestrial arthropods, which comprise the majority of animal taxa, finding a mating partner is a non-trivial and critical first step. No matter how beautiful or strong this male spider is, he's not going to be exposed to contest competition or female choice until he actually finds a female to display to or fight over. So mate searching is a somewhat less popular but no less important mechanism of sexual selection that we sometimes overlook. So mate searching can impose selection on morphological traits associated with improved speed and mobility, and also exquisitely tuned sensory systems like the antennae of this male moth that allow males to detect and orient toward female signals efficiently. So when we focus on the more popular selective mechanisms like mate choice in isolation and ignore the mate searching that precedes it, I argue that we are at risk of coming to mistaken conclusions because mate searching can act as an important selective filter. So for instance, consider this population of male symbols that vary in some trait like body size. If we ask which phenotypes are favored by female choice, we might conclude, say, that there is strong selection for male body size in this population. But if these males have to find females before they encounter mate choice, then it might turn out that smaller males are more successful searchers. And so males of intermediate size end up being the most successful in this population. So now let's come back to the male black widow that we were imagining earlier, who is ready to set out on an epic journey to find a female. So what traits and tactics might be under sexual selection? Well, if we do a quick laboratory experiment, looking at how male size is related to running speed, we might find a result like this. I think I did find this result, that larger males are faster. However, if we check to make sure that the range of male phenotypes that we're looking at in the laboratory is representative of natural populations, it turns out that the distribution is actually quite shifted relative to what is available in the field. So a large male in the laboratory is actually similar in size to an intermediate sized male in the field. And that's a problem if we want to understand how sexual selection actually operates in nature. So during my PhD, I wanted to address this question, among others, in the field. And so I did this work in collaboration with Sean McCann, who you saw behind me, and I mentioned earlier is the photographer. And we did this on the lands of the Sayut First Nation in coastal British Columbia. So this is a coastal sand dune ecosystem. The dunes are covered with low vegetation and scattered with driftwood logs, which make perfect homes for black widows. And there's a very large population of black widows at this site. And Sean and I undertook basically more or less total surveillance of this population over a couple of field seasons with monthly censuses and more frequent, less invasive surveys. We marked every spider uniquely with a paint code so that we could track them, and we could follow their movements, figure out which males visited which females, how far they traveled, whether they survived mate searching, and things like that. And so what we found, first of all, was that the operational sex ratio in this population is very strongly male biased. Throughout most of the mating season, there are more than 5 and as many as 25 males wandering around for every available female. We also found that males experience very high mortality during mate searching. So of males who are searching for a female for the first time, only 12% of them actually survive that journey. Of males who have found a female and then attempted to leave her web and find another one, only 12% survive. And then of those, again, very consistently, only 12% of males survive movements between females' web. So we've established that there is a strongly male biased operational sex ratio and high mortality during mate searching, meaning that there is likely to be strong sexual selection on mate searching males in this population. So back to our male who's ready to leave his web and undertake a perilous journey to find a female. Before he leaves, he needs some information. At a minimum, he's going to need information about the location of a potential mate, and he might also benefit from information about her quality or value as a mate, for instance, whether or not she's already mated, or whether approaching her means risking competition with rival males. Once he has information about a given female, he needs to decide to approach her and do so efficiently. And in general, animals can get information in 2 ways. One is by directly interacting with their environment, getting personal information about the location of a nearby female, for instance. They can also obtain information by paying attention to the behavior of other animals, like this male who can determine that there's probably a female nearby based on the behavior of other males, even if he can't see the female himself. So we wanted to know over what range males are able to find females, what traits might affect their searching success and speed, and how the availability of different kinds of information, chemical in this case, might affect their searching behavior in the field. So to do with this, we set up an experiment that was essentially a race for male black widow spiders. This is the finish line. So these are mesh cages containing female black widows and their silk. We lined them up on the beach, and then we released individually marked males. They were weighed and measured and painted with racing stripes, and then released in groups of about 20 at 10-meter intervals along the race course, which was perpendicular to that finish line. And we set this up so that the wind would be coming from behind the finish line up the race course, so that hopefully males will be able to detect female pheromones and move towards them. So we sat there at the finish line and waited for males to cross or not. And what we found was that males were able to detect females and reach the finish line from up to 60 meters away, which is in line with the sort of distances that we were finding males moving in our surveys. So they are good at detecting pheromones from far away. We also found that larger males were more likely to finish the race. So larger males more likely to survive and eventually end up at a female's web. However, of the males who made it to the finish line, it was the smallest males who got there fastest. So this suggests that intermediate males are going to be arriving, intermediate-sized males are going to be arriving at females' webs first. We found something, though, that was unexpected in this experiment. We found that with distance from females, so the males that we released farther away from females ended up running the fastest. So at first glance, it doesn't have an obvious information. Why would males that are farther away move faster? Well, let's look at what males were actually doing during mate searching. Sean and I spent a lot of time watching these spiders over many nights in the field. And we realized that when males are searching for females, they detect the pheromone coming from a female's web, and they start to move towards it. And when they're doing this, the beach is covered with low vegetation. They'll bump into some grass or another plant, and they'll climb up it. And when they get to the top, they do this very distinct behavior where they sort of hang down a little bit, and with their front two pair of legs, they slowly wave them back and forth like this and kind of spin in place. So if you're familiar with a questing tick, it's a lot like that behavior. And if you remember that moth's antennae that he uses to detect female pheromones, spiders' noses are on their feet. They have tiny hairs covering their legs that are used to detect chemical compounds. So he is essentially doing this behavior where he's tasting the air and slowly sensing the wind and figuring out from which direction the female's pheromone is coming. So he'll do this for a few minutes, and then once he gets his bearing, he's tasted the female, he knows she's in that direction, then he climbs back down and he repeats this pattern over and over again, moving towards the source of the pheromone, climbing up, getting some height, tasting the wind, getting his bearings, and eventually ending up at the female's web. Because he is a spider, he is constantly laying down a silk drag line behind him wherever he goes and anchoring it on the substrate. And so this means that a silk bridge is going to result that connects the tops of all of those grasses that he climbed up on his way to the female. And so we also saw sometimes that when a male would encounter a drag line of another male, he would run along it at high speed. And we thought, maybe these males, when they're searching, they're leaving behind silk highways that other males are taking advantage of. So males could be using personal information in the form of directly detecting the female's pheromone to orient towards females. But then when they encounter the silk of rival males, they might be using that to take advantage of that first male's effort in moving towards the female and using that to more efficiently arrive at her web. And this would make sense sort of as an accident of our experimental design. The males that were released farther away from the female, they were all released simultaneously and moving towards the finish line at the same time. They would be more likely to encounter the silk drag lines of rival males as they move down the race course. So the idea here is that males are using social information associated with the silk of rivals to find females faster. And to test that, we did a laboratory experiments with those students that I mentioned, where we made this X system, and we had a female at the right-hand side. She's in a cage. There's a fan blowing air towards the male so that he can smell her and wants to move towards her. So we release a male on the left-hand side. He runs along the string that forms the X, and when he gets to the intersection, he can choose whether to go right or left. It doesn't matter. All roads lead to the female. But now he has left a silk drag line behind him. Then when we release another male, he again moves towards the female. When he gets to the intersection, he can now choose to follow the silk of the other male or avoid it as he moves towards the female. And what we found was that males overwhelmingly chose to follow the silk of the other male. And when we compared, we did this again, where we gave them a choice between the silk of a male of the same species and the silk of a male of a closely related different species that also occurs at our field site, similar in size, same family, closely related genus. They discriminated between the silk of those two species, which suggests that this is chemical information on the silk that's giving them a species-specific cue that, okay, this is the silk of another black widow male who is also searching for a female. If I run along this silk trail, I'm more than likely going to be getting myself closer to a female's web. And this might be able to save them some time in terms of that climbing up and orienting. But also, it turns out that these are spiders that spend their life living on webs. They are adept at moving on silk. And so they're able to run faster when they have access to these silk trails than they're able to run on the ground. Or I think, and this is just comparing to running on an artificial thread like yarn versus their own silk. So in summary of this first story, we found that larger males have the best searching success. They're most likely to survive, but of those males, smaller males are the fastest at arriving at females' webs. And these male black widows are using silk-based personal and social information to find females efficiently. So we have gotten a little bit more information about how this first filter of mate searching works in nature. Of course, there's much, much more to the story in terms of how sexual selection is operating, but I don't have time for that today. I've done some work on it. My colleagues have parts of this puzzle as well, and you can ask me about it or read our papers. So this brings me to the second of my three identities, which is that I am a natural historian. So both in my work and outside my work, I really love to spend time outside observing organisms in their natural environment and learning about their natural history. So Sean is my partner and collaborator, and he and I like to go on nature walks and look for interesting insects and spiders. Usually I find them and point them out, and then he takes photographs of them. And we both have blogs where we like to share natural history stories from these outings. But sometimes these recreational natural history observations become the basis for new research, and in some cases are quite life-changing. So that brings me to my second research story, which is about the candy striped spider and its flexible foraging behavior and ecological impacts. So this all started during my PhD research when Sean and I would go for walks sometime in the early morning looking for insects. And sleeping bees and wasps are one of Sean's favorite photographic subjects. They're very convenient because they are cold and still. These bees would normally be flying around really rapidly in the heat of the day, but at dawn, and dusk, they get cool, they find a perch to sleep on, and Sean can take beautiful photos like this one against the sunrise. So while we were out one morning looking for sleeping bees and wasps, we came across this. So that poor little Coleoxys cuckoo leafcutter bee is being fed upon by this yellow and red spider. And we started seeing this more and more, this horrific carnage that was disturbing Sean's photography, but more importantly was seemed to be a really interesting interaction. So this was a perch where there were several wasps that were all sleeping together, and we came upon them all dead, and one of them still being fed on by this candy stripe spider. So what's going on here? Are these spiders taking advantage of the same qualities that make sleeping insects good photographic subjects, sneaking up and attacking them in the night when they are too cold and sluggish to defend themselves? We wanted to find out more. So this is just another example of that. So who are these spiders? Candy stripe spiders are theridiids, so they're in the same family as the black widows. They are they come in these three lovely color morphs, and a lot of effort has gone on into understanding the genetics and ecology of this color polymorphism, but extremely little attention has been paid to their behavior, particularly in North America. It's a relative newcomer here. It's originally from Europe, and it was apparently introduced to both the east and west coast of North America around 100 years ago, and it's now common across most of the continent. So we started paying more attention to them and reading up about them and spending more time watching what they were doing. And so we found out that a naturalist named William Bristow had written a book about spiders in the 50s. And he had spent some time watching these spiders in the UK and noted some of their predatory behavior. So their main thing is web-based ambush, which is typical of other theridiid spiders. So this spider is hiding in this messy web under some yarrow. And when an insect visits the flowers during the daytime and touches the sticky silk, the spider will rush out and grab it. And so we saw at our field site during the work we were doing on the black widows that these spiders would do this very frequently. They would catch wasps and flies and beetles and all sorts of other flower visiting insects from their capture webs on these plants. So this is sort of typical behavior for this kind of spider. And at night also they would catch things like wasps, or sorry, like moths that are feeding on nectar. So Bristow noted a second kind of predation. These spiders will also sometimes leave their webs and invade the webs of other spiders, which is not typical for web building theridiids. There is a group of relatives of these spiders that are specialists, kleptoparasitoids, but this is odd for a web builder. And so sometimes they'll go into an orb web like this one and steal prey from it. And sometimes they will prey on the inhabitants of the web. So Sean and I came across this poor couple of long-jawed orb weavers who were in the middle of mating, and the candy stripe spider snuck up on them and started wrapping them, both of them, while they were still in copula and eating them both. We also noticed that sometimes they would set up shop right next to a black widow's web and actually connect their web, almost integrate it into the black widow's tangle web, so that whenever vibrations in the black widow's web occurred because an insect was captured, the spider would be able to rush down and attempt to steal the prey. Or when the female had offspring and the spiderlings were still living on the web, they could come in like this candy stripe spider. The larger yellow one is feeding on baby black widows in their mother's web. So a third kind of predation, which Bristow didn't mention, but has been noted by other researchers, is that they will just use no web at all. They'll wander around on the vegetation and actively hunt insects, which again is very unusual for a web-building spider. We saw this quite a bit as well, often beetles and earwigs and bugs and things that were roaming around on grasses. But this final predation tactic that we were witnessing and which we started to call marauding doesn't seem to have been recorded before. And so we wanted to try to figure out how the spiders are doing this and whether our idea about them sneaking up on cold insects held water. So this is a video, and I think this was a staged predation. So we found a sleeping bee and we introduced the candy stripe spider below it and waited to see what would happen. So the spider walked right up and then it paused. It's got its forelegs on the bee, so it knows it's there. It's touching it, and then the bee sort of realizes that something's going on, starts to wake up, and then the spider attacks and it flings sticky silk from its spinnerets. It's using its last pair of legs to throw it on the insect, and now it's biting. And it'll alternate. You can see the poor bee is trying to sting, but it seems to be not able to defend itself from this attack. So it'll bite it a few times. There, the bee tries to sting, so it's not completely incapable of motion, but it does seem like it wasn't able to sort of warm up in time to fly away and escape. And ultimately here, the spider is successful and able to subdue the bee and feed on it. So that's the first example. And then here's another one. This one, I believe, was not staged. We just got really lucky and happened upon it. Whoops, I went past it. Apologies. Okay, the video is starting. So this spider is just kind of wandering around on the vegetation, touches the wasp, immediately turns around and starts flinging silk. This wasp is a little bit warmer. It's able to actually start attempting to fly, but the silk of Theridiid spiders is incredibly strong and sticky, and the spider is quite agile. And again, it's able to keep its body far enough away from the wasp that it avoids getting stung. So it's pretty impressive that these tiny little spiders are able to take down such large, well-defended prey. And then I'll just show you a third one because if anyone's starting to feel bad for the insects, in this case, the spider is not successful. And we think that the reason that this wasp was so easily able to repel the spider is this was one of those that we had set up. We found the wasp. Sean set up some really, really bright lights that were very warm. And by the time the spider got up there, the wasp was quite warm. And so it was able to respond right away and kick the spider. So this natural history observation led us to do a more detailed survey to see how common this tactic is, and also what else are these spiders eating. We realized that they were everywhere. As soon as we started learning about them, we noticed them everywhere, and it was quite easy to do a survey looking at their diet, because we would often find them still feeding on whatever they had caught, whether they were on a flower or just wandering around at night, still feeding on an insect, or when we were looking for the sleeping bees and wasps. So this graph shows you a breakdown of their diet. This was a 2-week survey at our field site. And their diet is dominated by hymenopterans, also some bugs, flies, beetles, and leps. All of these, of course, are insects, insect groups that contain lots of pollinators. They also eat fewer non-pollinating insect groups and non-insects like other spiders, of course, and isopods. And when we break this down by predation tactic, we were able to deduce, based on the context, whether they had taken these prey by marauding, active hunting, ambush from their own web, or invading the web of another spider. They are using all of these tactics, but definitely marauding is one of the primary ways that they are taking hymenopterans, so bees and wasps primarily, and occasionally ants. So we were able to get this published, it's about to be published, I hope. I'm doing the revisions right now. And this, of course, leads me to think about what are the consequences of what we've learned about this extremely flexible behavior of a very common spider that has a broad diet. So stay tuned. I'm working on this currently, but some of the questions that we're trying to address are how do the candy striped spiders affect pollinator behavior and mortality for insects that are visiting the flowers where these spiders have their ambush webs? Are they competing with native predators? Crab spiders have a very similar strategy of taking pollinators and other flower visiting insects on flowers. And so there could be interactions between these introduced candy striped spiders and native predators. And how is this going to affect insect populations in threatened ecosystems like the one that we were studying that is a coastal sand dune? And does the predation by candy striped spiders particularly impact insects that are habitat specialists of sand dunes, for instance, or pollinators of rare plants that live in those threatened ecosystems? And then finally, on a slightly more positive note, these spiders are often really common in agricultural ecosystems, and as a generalist predator, are they actually having a positive impact there, providing ecosystem services by eating lots of pest insects? So these are all things that I am either currently working on or hope to be working on in the near future that have all been inspired by this research that began with curiosity. And I want to mention as well that an integral part of the way that I'm approaching this research is collaborating with and benefiting from the expertise and contributions of the amazing community of naturalists on the internet, including through an iNaturalist project called Spider Hunters, and also through outreach to communities on Facebook, local natural history societies across North America. And these data from community scientists taking pictures of these spiders where they are will allow me to collect data on their range in North America, how that has changed since their introduction, their phenology, their habitat and microhabitat preferences, what plants they're associated with, and what they're eating, which will help me to answer the questions I just talked about in terms of their impact as an introduced predator in North America. So this approach, interacting with community scientists and people online, brings me to my third identity as a science communicator. So ever since I started learning about spiders, which was only about 12 years ago, I used to be terrified of them actually. Since I started learning about them, I've had an overwhelming desire to tell everyone the good news. How they aren't scary, how they're actually far more helpful to humans than they are harmful, and how fascinating their biology and behavior are. So I do this in a variety of ways, including in-person talks and outreach events, and also by being very online. So I mentioned before that I have my blog. I also spend a lot of time on Twitter And this might help to explain why my picture comes up when you Google arachnologist. So I not as much anymore, but I used to spend a lot of time on Twitter, answering questions, tweeting about my research and that kind of thing. And I also run a Twitter account associated with a community science project called Recluse or Not, with colleagues. And with this, we identify spiders for people. People are really concerned about brown recluse spiders, which apart from black widows are one of the only kinds of spiders in North America that actually are capable of harming humans. And so when people are concerned that they found a brown recluse, we identify it for them. And this is also allowing us to track the range expansion of this medically important species in North America and see where it pops up in places where we didn't think it was. So spending time online doing science communication led directly to this third research project, which was a pandemic collaboration with a global team of arachnologists. So this comic on the left-hand side of the slide is an extremely accurate depiction of me and most of my colleagues when we read your typical popular science article about spiders on the internet. Usually they're quite bad, and we get upset and want to set the record straight. So this isn't just a pet peeve about people being wrong and not understanding my favorite animals, but there are also significant costs to misinformation about spiders. So fear of spiders leads people to far more frequently than you might think burn down houses in attempts to kill the spiders with fire. Very frequently, schools and other buildings get shut down due to supposed infestations of dangerous spiders. And attempts to control these spiders using harmful pesticides that are unlikely to be effective. So overuse and misuse of insecticides. And the main threat to human health posed by spiders is not their bites, which are exceedingly rare, but misdiagnoses of sometimes extremely dangerous conditions, extremely serious conditions like Lyme disease and some cancers, which then go improperly treated because they are mistaken for spider bites. Moreover, widespread fear and misunderstanding of spiders and other creepy crawlies has real consequences for human relationships with the environment, and they perpetuate a feedback loop that disconnects people from nature. And this is a really nice paper that just came out that illustrates this sort of feedback loop perfectly. Again, like what I was just talking about, trying to exterminate spiders, other animals because you don't understand them, and even avoidance of nature because of fears of spiders and other creepy crawlies. So my colleagues and I set out to investigate the portrayal of spiders in the media and what factors might be related to the quality of that reporting and the spread of incorrect information. So we amassed a collection of over 5,000 articles that had been published online over the last decade. And we recorded variables, many of them, but some of the more important ones here are going to be errors. So did the paper or article include factual errors about spiders? Was the article scored as sensationalist? What spider was it about? Did the reporter consult an arachnologist or another expert like a medical professional? So this is all in an open access database that anyone can look at and use and ask other questions with. And we have some planned, but the take-home message in terms of the quality of the news is that, unsurprisingly to us, it wasn't that great. There's some variation across continents, but overall, fully 47% of articles had at least one error in them, often many more than that, and 43% of them were scored as sensational. So that doesn't bode particularly well. We also did a network analysis that looked at the connections between individual stories that got reproduced in other countries around the world. So this map shows all the connections between countries, and the size of the little pie charts indicates the number of news articles from that country. And then the pies are the proportion of articles that are sensational. You'll notice that the UK and Mexico are particularly bad for sensationalized news stories. And then we looked at what factors predicted connectedness in this network. So trying to understand what drives the spread of these stories. And unsurprisingly, language was a strong predictor, because stories that are in the same language, countries that speak that same language are more likely to reproduce those stories. And it had something to do with the proportion of a population that has access to the internet. A little bit about what spider species were present and whether they're dangerous or not. But the main thing and the most important thing was that sensationalism was a really, really strong predictor of the spread of information. So this suggests that sensationalism has a really big impact on the global spread of misinformation. Of course, this is about spiders, but we're viewing this as sort of a case study that might be able to allow us to learn something about the spread of misinformation more generally. The really encouraging news, though, from this analysis was that it didn't matter whether journalists quoted medical or pest control professionals in their stories. Often the errors ended up being quoted or to do with medical professionals or pest controllers in some cases. But the really important thing is that the likelihood of errors and the likelihood of sensationalism decreased quite dramatically when journalists quoted arachnologists specifically. And I think that this is really promising, because it means there's something that we can do to have an impact on this. We can make more of an effort to talk to journalists, and my colleagues and I are working on putting together a database of arachnologists who are willing to talk to the media to help with this. But this really, to me, reinforces the importance of being a science communicator who spends time contributing good information to the internet, but especially highlights that taking the time to talk to journalists has a real impact on the quality of the information that is available to the public and combating the spread of misinformation. So that brings me to the end of my talk and this tangled web of research stories and identities and approaches to science. And I would be happy to take any questions if we have time.
That was amazing. Thank you. If you are able to turn on your camera, please do so with me and join in an enormous web of applause for Dr. Scott. That was fantastic. And we do have time if there are